Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of STEM Girls Virtual. My name is Emily, and I'm here on behalf of Cincinnati Museum Center. On this show, we talk about different careers in the STEM fields. So those fields being science, technology, engineering, and math. Today, we have UV Chemist Karen Schroeder of the Kustom Group with us. Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you. Based off of a couple of conversations, it sounds like you've always been interested in STEM, and you had a couple of pretty influential teachers in school that taught science. So can you tell us a little bit about them and their classes and what was like really nice about them?
Sure. I always have had a love for science. It wasn't until my junior year of high school where I really focused on chemistry. I knew I wanted to get into science, really wasn't sure which one, but I had a teacher, we moved the middle of my junior year, and I had a teacher when we moved who made it so much fun. And this is the first time I had a chemistry lab. And I still remember after how many decades later, one of the labs we did was determining how much water was in one kernel of popcorn. I like, really? And then we got to eat the experiment afterwards. So it was all pretty cool. The other thing with the labs, and I've always loved lab work, there's problem solving involved. I love crossword puzzles. I'm very much into problem solving. And so that kind of went hand in hand as well. So plus it's all a visual thing for me too. I can read stuff all day long, but unless I'm actually doing it, sometimes it's hard for me to understand what I'm reading all the time, and to be able to get in the lab and actually do the work and see the result, then I can, aha moment.
Oh, that's awesome. And that experiment sounds very memorable. We're talking about it now. So that's really neat that something that happened a few years ago, you're still able to bring up and be excited about it. So that's awesome. Yeah. And so you went on to college and ended up studying chemistry, and you thought you were going to be a teacher, but you ended up taking a different path and you decided to study organic chemistry. What about organic chemistry in particular did you really like?
It was the problem solving again. So organic chemistry is based on carbon, and carbon is in all life forms, whether they are currently living or gone. There's always carbon involved. And with organic chemistry, there was always a problem solving exercise with exams. I distinctly remember one semester, the professor giving us 5 questions, and basically we were given sets of data, and you had to figure out the structure of whatever these sets of data described. And I thought, wow, that is really kind of cool. Also at the time, it was very big for us undergrads to want to go work at a big pharmaceutical company and create new new drugs and prescriptions and medications for people. That didn't end up happening for me. It did for a few of my friends, but just wasn't meant to be. But that was the thinking at the time of to go into that field.
Yeah, and that assignment sounds like problem solving and the mystery of it. You know, you're solving a mystery, so being creative as you're problem solving. So that's
well. And I remember the last question, looking at the answer key that he had posted, and he even said, "I think it's this." He didn't even really know exactly what it was, and I thought, "Wow, that's pretty bold." You're not really sure what it is, so I guess some people got partial credit for it.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's awesome. So after college, you went on to work for a company that made mouthwash. So what kind of skills did you learn in this first job, and are you still using those skills today in your career?
Very much so. Attention to detail is huge in STEM, in the lab work, recording your results accurately. We did quality control work on raw materials coming in and batches going out. And so all of that needed to be documented, especially being mouthwash. You had, government regulations that you had to deal with as well. Another skill that I never thought I'd ever use I don't think I've used it since, but it was kind of interesting, is we'd get tanker trucks of alcohol that went into the mouthwash, and I'd have to climb up on top of the tanker truck and dip a bottle in to get a sample to test it to make sure it was the correct stuff. So, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that sounds like a very focused skill to have, but important,
Yeah.
for sure. I thought you were going to say you got to drive the tanker trucks, and I was
No.
like, so cool.
There is another important thing that I almost forgot. Equipment maintenance and calibration.
Yeah.
I learned that, and I still use that to this day. Again, the problem solving. If something's not working and the manual doesn't really tell you what to do, you know, and this is before the internet, so you had to kind of figure out how to fix it. So there was, I remember at least one time we had 2 shifts, and this was back in the age of pagers. So me and the other chemist would alternate with the pager to be on call, and sure enough, 10 o'clock one night, I got a page, and I called in, and they said, the instrument's not working, can you come in and fix it? And it was a pretty simple fix, but that has proved invaluable too. And again, it all goes back to the problem solving.
Yeah, and I think when sometimes someone thinks of a scientist, they don't think of a scientist as being creative or using skills such as writing or you know, being really organized. But I think it's really important in STEM to be creative and to use all these different skills you have, whether you're a dancer or an artist, in your career. So I think it's really awesome to kind of hone those skills as a scientist.
Yep, very much.
Yeah. So my next question is, a little while later in your career, you decided to be a UV chemist and worked for PPG Paints in a UV lab. Can you tell us first off, what is UV chemistry and what kind of work does a UV lab typically do?
Sure. UV chemistry also is based on organic chemistry and carbon. And so we've all painted, whether it's been finger painting when we were kids or painting a room in our house, and, you know, or painting your fingernails. There's always a time where you have to let it dry. With UV, you run it underneath an ultraviolet light and it instantly dries, or what we call cures. A good example of this, there's a couple in the non-industrial world. If you go get a manicure and you get a gel polish and you put your hands under the little lights, that's UV light. The reason why it's not instantly done is because it's a very low dose, so you don't get sick and don't burn your hands. Similar to that is if you get a filling in your tooth, they shine a little light now to cure it. Back when I had fillings when I was little, they were of something else, I can't remember, but you had to wait hours before you could even eat because you had to wait for it to dry or to set. Now they just put a little, what is now an LED, which is similar to UV, shine it on there and it cures it and you can do whatever. So those are some real world applications to the same kind of thing.
Awesome. I have done all of the things you mentioned, getting my filling and getting my nails done before. So yeah.
And I do have a little show and tell right here of one of our laboratory UV bulbs. Mm-hmm. So this is what it looks like. And inside, and I don't know if you can see it, there's a little bit of mercury.
Okay.
Little beads of mercury. Oh, there's one.
Yeah.
Basically what happens is these electrodes are hooked up to the lamp, and when you turn it on, it creates an arc and it ignites, vaporizes the mercury, and it causes it to glow. Now it also emits ultraviolet, visible, so you'll see it glow, and infrared as a form of heat. So you have to vent the heat off. The other thing with them, so let's say this is your bulb, then you have reflectors. Now these have got plastic on them, so you don't touch them. The reflectors actually go on top. There's like 2 like this, because if you think about it, the ultraviolet goes 360. It emits 360 around it, but your paper or your board or whatever your coating is under here. And so you're losing all of this energy. So the reflectors actually reflect all that energy down and cure your coating or your ink on your substrate.
Very neat. Very neat. So Karen, what are we looking at right now?
So this is our lab UV lamp, and as you can see, there's visual light coming, like I mentioned, of the 3 different kinds of radiation that come off of it.
Right.
There's also ultraviolet light that you won't be able to see, and then we have it vented for the IR radiation that comes off as heat. So it's really important for the UV lamp to be properly heated or cooled to the right temperature in order for it to work. We have it on a little conveyor, and you can adjust the power outage and the speed depending on what you're curing, what you're going on, as far as substrate goes, that kind of thing. And on a printing press, they're way bigger, feet long for the lamps, the bulbs, and usually multiple bulbs. I've seen them where there are 4 or 6 bulbs across.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, for really big printing presses. So yeah, that's what we use here in the lab.
Very neat. That's a nice way to, people can kind of see, like you were saying, visually get a better idea of some of the work you and Kustom Group do. So that's really neat. And that looks big enough to me already, so I can't imagine one that has even more bulbs. So that one looks pretty big, but I guess it's not in comparison to others.
Yeah, I've been in a printing press where it was so big when they shut it down to change the bulbs, you actually had to walk into it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay, that is big.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. Thank you for showing us that.
You're welcome.
Next up, you decided to become a full-fledged chemist and came to Cincinnati to work for the Kustom Group. Can you tell us who the Kustom Group is and what work they do?
Sure. Kustom Group was founded about 31 years ago by 3 guys who grew up together, and they all worked in the ink industry at one time or another. And they started Kustom Group because they saw there was a need for specialized materials in the printing industry that a lot of the big companies wouldn't do. So one of our unofficial mottos is, we'll do what the big companies won't. And so we provide to the printing industry what I call everything but the color. So coatings, what are called ink vehicles, which I know we'll get into in a second, and then additives. We do make some product with what we call specialty pigments, and those are sparkly, glittery, color shift, what they're called haptics, so they feel, so there's sometimes you get a book with a cover on it that feels velvety.
Yeah.
That's like a soft feel coating. Some of your junk mail's got some color shift stuff. Actually, even dollar bills, you can see a little bit of a color shift in the ink.
Yeah.
We do things similar to that. We don't, not those, but similar to that as far as printing goes.
Very neat. And the printing industry has evolved a lot, I would say, even in the past 20 years. So what kind of products are involved in the printing industry, and how do you think the pandemic has affected the industry?
So when I started here 18 years ago and I heard the word printing, of course, I immediately went to books, newspapers, and magazines because I'm very much a reader. I love to read. And there is that. And granted, in the past 20 years, it's gone down significantly. However, I still love a good book and a magazine and a newspaper. And I'll go into Barnes & Noble and smell the books just because it smells so good to me.
Yes.
But now what's really big is labels and packaging. And especially with the pandemic, it's become super important that everything is labeled and packaged correctly. Especially with food, consumables like toilet paper, and medications, antibacterial wipes, all that kind of stuff. And so in that regard, we are considered an essential business during the pandemic because we provide to those printers and those industries.
Okay. And you touched on this a couple minutes ago, but as a UV chemist with Kustom Group, you formulate ink coatings and something else called ink vehicles. So can you tell us what ink vehicles are? Because what I'm picturing in my mind is probably not what it is.
No, it's not an automobile. So if you think about, let's say, an ink formula, and think about it like a recipe, chocolate chip walnut cookies, okay? So you've got several different parts of your recipe. The vehicle portion would be your main portion of your recipe: the flour, the sugar, the oil. And if you change any of those, use almond flour instead of white flour, use brown sugar instead of white sugar, or molasses, things of that nature, you change the basic properties of your cookies. And it's the same thing with ink. So we can use one different kind of resin that is more flexible and works better with something it goes on that's more flexible, or we can use something that needs to be harder. You can change the main properties of your ink or coating that way. Then your additives would be things like vanilla, the walnuts, the chocolate chips. And then the pigment would be like your cocoa powder to make the chocolate part. That also adds some flavoring too. But so I tend to think of it like a recipe in that regard. So the vehicle brings all the main properties, and the other things add to it to make it, to differentiate it from everything else.
Okay, I love that analogy, and I really want chocolate chip cookies now.
Sorry.
But, no, good. That's a great way of thinking about it. So I get what you're saying now. It's all one little thing can change the whole thing. So yeah, okay. And with your work with the Kustom Group, you were a lab manager for a time, and now you mostly do regulatory work. Can you tell us what this regulatory work mostly consists of?
Sure. So, excuse me, I've had 3 jobs in the 18 years here at Kustom Group, and this is the latest one. However, I do like to get back on the bench when I can. It's just the chemist in me. So because we are a small company, we're pretty much cross-trained, and so it's pretty easy to do that. As far as regulatory goes, in our industry, it's basically the management classification of all the chemicals that we use. And you've probably heard of a safety data sheet, or an SDS, which is a document that's 16 parts, and it gives all of the safety, first aid, physical and chemical hazards and properties, just a whole slew of information that helps people understand what they're working with. This came into I want to say last week, when there was the issue with the Brent Spence Bridge and the collision. What happened is one of the materials that spilled was potassium hydroxide, which is what they call caustic and very corrosive to metal. And if you look at that safety data sheet, it says on there corrosive to metal. So they knew it was a really big issue, that the firefighters had what they needed in order to put it out properly, because using water was a bad idea. They needed to use a special chemical foam in order to put that out. But anyway, that was a real life example again. What
Very
I do now is, yeah, it's affecting all of us, right?
Yeah.
I create and update the safety data sheets. The regulatory information is constantly changing, not only the information on the raw materials, but the regulations that govern them. And every country has its own basically set of rules, it seems. Now, the safety data sheets are all under what's called the global harmonized system. So they all have the 16 points to them, and they all have to have all of that information. But countries kind of have some of their own specific information too, and they actually have their own lists of approved chemicals that are okay for use in their country. So sometimes I'm asked to, hey, can we use this product and can we sell it to this country based on the raw materials? There's also involved with regulatory, nowadays it's huge, food contact. Is this material okay to go on something that's going to be in contact with food? Or if it's going to be indirectly in contact with food. And what I mean by that, if you think of direct food contact, let's say a microwavable meal. the coating that's on the inside of that paperboard package is contacting the food, but the one on the outside is not. So there are different rules and regulations for each thing that comes into contact versus not contact with the food. And then there are regulations on coatings that go on toys. There are specific states that have their own regulations.
I was about to ask that.
Yeah, and then we've all heard of bisphenol A with the baby bottles. So there are people that say, hey, we don't want any of that in our product. Also really big right now is PFOAs, which I had to write this down because it's a long word. Perfluorooctanoic acid. It's a byproduct of making Teflon.
Okay.
And that's a huge thing that the industry has realized is bad. And the people who are making Teflon are making versions without it because consumers have been like, no, we can't have that anymore. So along with all of that, there's also annual submissions to the EPA about our usage of certain chemicals and customers needing regulatory information. And it's sometimes can be a little tedious, but it's constantly evolving, constantly changing. So there's always something going on.
Right. And, safety is a huge factor. So you and your fellow coworkers are making sure that what you're making is safe for the people who are consuming them. So yeah, that is a lot to do in your work. You have to be probably very organized and able to kind of multitask like a pro.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh wow. So what I want to ask now is, we've alluded to it a little bit earlier about the printing industry, but because it is evolving still, where do you see the printing industry going, or what do you hope to see with the printing industry evolving?
Yeah, that's one thing. It evolves a lot. And it evolves for a couple of reasons. One, because the customers have dictated it. We need something that does this. We're looking for something that does this. And also because the technology changes. So just even 10 years ago, things have changed so much in the last 5 to 10 years. The traditional printing is still there, especially in places like India. They have a lot of it. It's still here too, but there's been more of a move to go to what's called digital. Now, it's not digital like you and I meeting digitally right now. It's more digital printing. So traditionally, on a printing press, you would have long runs of one type of print. Now with digital, not only can you change every single sheet that comes off of the printing press, it can be totally different, but you can do very short runs and it's economical. So instead of doing thousands and thousands, you can do 20 if you want to. So that's been really huge. And then on top of that, instead of UV, a lot of people are going over to what's called LED, light emitting diode. And we have one of those here as well. The hazards of it are less than UV. And there's some really good assets to it. You can instantly turn it on and off. There's no warm up or cool down time like with ultraviolet. But it has its limitations too. So you have to run it a little slower. There's not as much power yet, but that's constantly evolving, constantly. Also, a big push recently is sustainability. So customers are asking for things that are recyclable, compostable, things of that nature. And that comes down to a couple of different issues, raw materials, how things are cured or dried, what it's on. So there's been a big push about that. I've been reading a lot about that lately too.
Yeah, that would be awesome if, a package that arrives to you either in the mail or something you pick up at the grocery store, you automatically know, I can throw this in the compost pile, or I know this is going to be recycled. But a lot of times we have to check and make sure, and then there's different things that can be recycled where you live, and Yeah, so that would be awesome if there could be a uniform policy at some point. That'd be really great.
I realize there are a couple more things too. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Antimicrobial is obviously really huge. I was in a doctor's office last month, and the elevator buttons had an antimicrobial coating on them. So there's a big push for that kind of thing. A lot of people who touch things to have that done. And then in the printing industry, there's a huge need for young people. So traditionally, it's been guys and guys who've been there since they were young. And with everything evolving the way it is between the antimicrobial and the environmental sustainability and the digital, we need young people to bring in their knowledge of the updated computer stuff and their knowledge of sustainability and some new ideas, and really get involved and progress the printing industry even farther.
Yeah, and a lot of times when I'm talking to someone, we talked about the importance of volunteering or job shadowing or internships. So it sounds like with the printing industry, you know, a lot of the interests that teens or young adults have right now, again, the environment, computers, things like that, it seems like this would be a field that they could do a lot and accomplish a lot. So,
Yep.
so anyone watching, job shadow. 9 times out of 10, when you call someone to say, hey, can I shadow you at your job? They're going to say yes. Yeah, so do it. Yeah, and another question I had for you, Karen, is you sent me a biography, and in it you mentioned a mentor. So I wanted to ask you, how important do you think it is to have mentors, especially for women in the STEM field? Yeah, can you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Invaluable is in one word. I actually have quite a few peers that I consider mentors as well, currently, let alone my teachers, and my first boss at PPG, who I still talk to. Not only because of them blazing a trail and being an example, but they're also really great to bounce ideas off of, and concerns, and hey, how would you handle this situation? I've done that before. So especially coming at it from a female perspective in a largely male dominated profession, invaluable.
Yeah, awesome. So Karen, if anyone's interested in learning more about UV chemistry, are there some sources you can share with us?
Yes, my go-to is radtech.org, radtech.org. It is the energy cure organization that is worldwide, and it's made up of a bunch of professionals who this is what they do. And there's free courses on there regarding the basics of UV chemistry, where it's used. There are lots of resources on there, and there's a contact on there where you can actually reach out for more information, and they'll probably get you in touch with other people that can get you more information or maybe even help job shadow in the area.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, we will share that link to the website in the event description for anyone who's interested, because it sounds like a really neat, especially with so many people doing schooling from home right now, or parents that might be homeschooling right now. That sounds like a really great way to kind of learn chemistry in a really fun way. So
Yeah.
thank you. Yeah. And my last question for you, Karen, is one that I ask all of my interviewees, but it's, what advice would you give to young women and girls who may be interested in a career in the STEM field?
Okay. So as soon as you find something that you enjoy, try to find out more about it. And I've seen a few of the interviews on the website, and I hear this all the time, but there's truth in it, is read. We all love to read. Whether it's online or a book from the library or whatever, read up on it. The other thing I would say is to try to talk to your teachers and see if they know anybody that you can actually talk to about it. Once the pandemic is over and restrictions are lifted, job shadowing, like you were talking about, is huge. And just like you said, you'd be amazed if you just called and asked. how many people would be like, sure, come on in. I mean, you might have to do like a little safety
Right.
thing,
Right.
whatever, but totally worth it because, like I said, I'm more of a visual person, and that would be more invaluable to me than any textbook, you know, that I could probably read about it.
Right, right. Well, thank you. So thank you again, Karen, for joining us today, and thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.